Hello, listeners! This is Federica
and Alexandra from Drug Safety Matters.
Before we resume our episode, we wanted to announce a new podcast feature. It's called Fan Mail, and it makes it even easier for you to get in touch with us.
That's right. All you have to do is click the link at the top of this episode's show notes. That will open a new text message directly to the show.
All text messages are anonymous and will be sent to our podcast platform. You can use this feature to ask us questions,
suggest new topics,
or just say hi.
We can't wait to hear from you. Now on with the show.
Welcome to Drug Safety Matters, a podcast by Uppsala Monitoring Center where we explore current issues in pharmacovigilance and patient safety. My name is Fredrik Beneus, and I will be your host for today's episode. The narrative fields and individual case safety reports can carry information that is crucial for the discovery of new adverse drug reactions, but they also require significant amounts of manual labor, both on the side of the reporter and of the assessor. To explore how pharmacovigilance professionals interact with these narrative fields in their work, my Uppsala Monitoring Center colleagues Alem Zekarias, Senior Pharmacovigilance Scientist, and Joana Félix, Medical Informatician, performed an interview study with assessors from different parts of the world. Today, Joana and Alem are joining me in the studio to tell me and you about the results and give us some tips on how to write the perfect narrative. Welcome to the Drug Safety Matters studio, Alem.
Hi, thank you.
And Joana.
Hi, thank you so much.
I've really been looking forward to talking to you about this study of yours, where you have looked at how pharmacovigilance assessors interact with narrative fields in individual case safety reports. Now, I'd like to start off with a very basic question, just so we're all on the same page here. What do we mean when we say narrative fields?
So narrative fields are parts of the individual case safety reports. And this is where you would find relevant clinical details about a patient experience with a suspected ADR. So here you could see it as a standalone medical story where you bring everything together to understand what happened.
Right. And how much text are we talking about?
So normally, because you want to include patient characteristics, details on their therapy, medical history, and all of the clinical course. Right now, in the current standard, you can go until 100,000 characters, which it would mean around 24 pages A4 of text.
That's a lot of text.
It is, yeah.
And what would be a normal, because I would suspect that not everyone would write 24 pages.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. No, it's normally would be maybe less than a page, I would assume, around that. Yeah.
And do all reports have them? Do you have to add narrative to a report to be able to submit it?
No, actually. So the minimum information for a valid safety report should be at least one identifiable patient, one AGR, one reporter, and then it should be a drug. So on the question if all reports do have them, unfortunately not. So free text clinical information does have an important role during the signal assessment, as Joana just provided us. And it differs, actually. It's quite hard to quantify what reports, the amount of data. But for some reports, they are quite lengthy, but also repetitive maybe. And for others, there are just a couple of sentences, more short and sweet and on the point. So it differs actually, but also between the stakeholders. We can see some stakeholders really like to write more lengthy report, which can be good and complement the structured information, while other reporters do keep it very, very short.
Could you tell me why you decided to carry out this study? What were the main reasons behind it?
So having worked, both of us, with signal detection and assessment for years, we acknowledged, of course, the importance of narratives in signal management and in pharmacovigilance in general. And pharmacovigilance assessors review ICSR narratives to determine causality, severity, but also the expectedness of adverse events. And they may use like different tools like coding systems or algorithms guided by like regulatory templates or their expertise. But despite these general guidelines on the narrative structure, we know quite little how assessors interact with the narratives during the signal management and what drives this interaction. So we wanted to study and to see so the study aimed to identify needs and opportunities to support assessors in their work. So we wanted to focus on the challenges and the needs in order to be able to advance the pharmacovigilance science and achieve meaningful impact.
Right. So is this the first study of its kind?
To the best of our knowledge, yes.
That's very exciting then, I think, because it's groundbreaking work, this exploratory study of yours. So how did you perform this study?
So as Alem was saying, this is exploratory because we believe that nothing has been done on this topic before. So with that sense, we use the qualitative framework. We designed some interview guidelines with some structure around it. And we then just selected participants based on our network and based on also their hands-on experience in PV. So we wanted experts in the pharmacovigilance area. So basically through those contacts and networks, we arranged this in-depth interviews. They were mainly online. And we used the interview guide. And after that, we just transcribed it, did the dirty work, and recorded it, transcribed it, and then we did an analysis based on the themes we would find.
Right. And how many participants were there in all?
There were 5 participants from 4 different countries.
I know that you cannot go into exactly which countries these were, but what could you say which regions they covered?
Yeah, we can say so. All 5 participants do represent almost all regions around the world, and both, low and middle income as well as high income settings. And as Joana said, they have, a wide, broad experience in hands-on pharmacovigilance, which was the key here, because the default that we really didn't want to have the textbooks answer. We really want to have the truth, like how do you actually work with, the interaction with the case narratives, and to be able to capture that real or truth information, we wanted to have experienced assessors.
So did you see any cultural differences there?
No, actually. So as I said, they had different backgrounds, different cultural regions. We had pharmacists as well as medical doctors. And I think the main difference here was that, they were more related to the experience of working with ICSR rather than related to where they come from. But as of course, what resources a center has also plays an important role rather than where, what part of the world the assessors came from.
I would definitely agree with the resource part. I think this is where, because we're analyzing or describing interactions, is really, really dependent on the resources that you have.
And if we jump forward into the results of your study, your interview questions focused on 3 areas: when, why, and how assessors interact with the case narratives. And when analyzing these answers, you identified 4 main themes. The first is to do with the assessor's view of the narrative's content and value. The second is about the processes where the interaction with narratives takes place. And then the third theme is about the challenges that the assessors experience when interacting with the narratives. And the fourth and final theme then is about the needs, or their needs, how they think that their interaction with narratives could be improved or enhanced in different ways. So if we start with the first theme here, content and value, could you describe what you found there?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, although they came from different regions and backgrounds, I think overall, all of the interviews emphasize really how absolutely fundamental the narratives are for their signal management tasks. So they really see it as the core, the heart of the report. However, not all reports, or in this case narratives, are complete. So, and some lack key details that are really essential for them to really understand the adverse event. At the same time that it's seen as a vital source of clinical information that they can't get from any other field, it's also an obstacle and a challenge to their work.
Considering how important the narrative fields are, coming from perhaps a more naive question would be, wouldn't it make sense for it to be a compulsory part of the reporting, just as the other fields are?
That's a good point. But in the end, it is also, we have the structure part of the report as well as the free text information. And you do capture quite valuable information with the structure field as well, drug and, what kind of, an indication, patient characteristics and so on. But it is also time consuming and challenging to report an AGR and to make that part also mandatory to make, for making a report valid can be a challenge, of course. But as we saw in the study that yes, they do value narratives, as we can confirm, both Joana and I were working with this as well. But also examples of information that could contain in these narratives could be like a comprehensive, as we said, clinical picture that complements the structured information, but also like information regarding risk factors, knowing, what are, can you identify some risk factors for this patient, which of course may increase the likelihood for developing a specific AGR, temporal information. Do we know what, when, how, the patient took the drug, for example, but also motive to report was something one of the interviewees really highlighted, which we also can understand and respect, because someone wants to say something with a report, and trying to understand what the reporter wants to convey with the report is important. And you can't really always, collect that information in the structure field. And that's why the narrative information is so crucial, since it can, have the possibility to complement the structured information. Then you understand, why did this reporter actually take the time to report this ADR?
So, and then, as I would interpret your answer also, it's sort of a balancing act here too. We want to have as much information as possible, but at the same time, we want to make it as easy for the reporters as possible to report.
Yes.
And so if we demand too much information, we risk not getting any information at all.
Yeah, and we live in a field that is really marked by underreporting. So definitely that balance is key, like quality information and quantity, and motivating people to provide rich narratives, but also facilitating that process, I think, is key.
And I also think, if the reporter understands the importance of including case narratives, and also one important aspect, because we are all humans, of course, you being driving, if you have this motivation, if you understand the impact of providing this case narratives, maybe you feel even more engaged and motivated to report this information. But if you don't really understand or see the value of reporting, of course, it makes it even harder to expect the reporters to also share case narratives.
From a communications point of view, I would say that sounds like a very important aim with your study as well, to actually convey to reporters how important these narrative fields are for the assessors. So if we move on to the second theme here, the processes, this is to do with the when the assessors interact with the narratives, but also how they do it. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So most interviews highlight the importance of narratives in signal detection, but case analysis, but also during code validation, emphasizing the manner of interaction with the narratives fields without digital support. So the narrative plays a crucial role in coding specific fields, meaning drugs, adverse events, and validating pre-processed codes, with some participant using, automated coding models, for example. So during prioritization, narratives are also reviewed to identify serious or unexpected cases. This is also a manual process, and this is because, during the pandemic, we saw a steep increase of number of suspected adverse drug reports, of course. But that's in general, when you do work with signal detection assessment, we talked about underreporting before, but for some combination, we can say almost that we have an overreporting. And to do that manually, to know which of these, in this amount of data in front of me, which reports are the most informative ones here, and how do I know where to start in this detective work, which is signal detection and assessment is a detective work. So that's also as something that we could identify in this study. But also in case assessments, narratives provide essential information with some assessors using tools like ChatGPT for assistance in analyzing free text. And additionally, assessors often reach out to reporters to clarify or complete missing details in the narratives, which we also could identify that having that possibility to go back to the primary reporter for asking them follow-up or confirmatory questions to what they have shared before.
I think this is very interesting because a lot of what you describe it's heavy on the manual labor.
Yep.
And here we have one participant describing how they use ChatGPT. I would expect that is something we will be seeing a lot more of in the future. What are your reflections on this use here of ChatGPT? Are there quality concerns or are there?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a matter of highlight and maybe concern as well. But I think the most important thing in this case specifically highlights how assessors have a task, and sometimes they will come up with their own solution to fill those gaps that they know they have. So, for example, in this case specifically, the participant felt that they lacked clinical expertise and they had low resources around them. So not a lot of resources that could complement their clinical expertise. So they turned to ChatGPT as a tool to support their work, in a way to complement their work. They would always say that they would not be making the decisions for them, but it would be as a friend, almost as a colleague. And I think that's really interesting because the gaps are there. And if we don't actively engage with them and look for them, they will be filled by a solution.
I agree. In this specific case, I think there was a very innovative solution actually to do that. We did the study some time ago now, and to be able to know that the strengths but also the limitations, which this interview is new with it, and to use more ChatGPT for a sounding board was very wise. And this interviews didn't make any decision based on that, but more like a sounding board due to limited resources.
Then that brings us to the third theme, which is also very interesting, the challenges that the assessors experience in their interaction with the narratives here. Could you tell us a bit more about your findings here?
So some narratives are time-consuming due to the length and repetitive nature, and extracting relevant data from these narratives, such as timing, risk factors, and lab information, for example, is a manual and labor-intensive process. So 3 interviews noted the challenge of identifying which narratives are informative, as I said before, as the relevance of information varies depending on the clinical situation. Additionally, 2 interviews highlighted the difficulty reporters face in writing complete and relevant narratives, which often lead to irrelevant or duplicate information. As I said before, narratives, they are certain standards and guidelines how you should write them. If you just repeat what's already been captured in the structured information, they're not really, the purpose with the narratives is not really, is pointless, useless, if I can say it, using those words. The narratives do have an important role in reporting adverse drug reactions. And I think that's there, in this amount of data for some combinations, of course it can be hard to really find the most interesting, helpful case in this specific assessment, if they are hidden in this amount of information.
Thinking about this identified challenge here, you say the lack of knowledge among reporters on how to write a complete narrative, and you touched upon this already. Could you give some more tips on how to write the complete narrative or the perfect narrative, so to say?
So this is, I have a medical background, and when you have medical studies, like narratives or the medical history, it's key. So I think one thing that it's very clear is that things that before maybe we take for granted, that are given to you during education in the field, could be emphasized here, maybe to some education and training about there are these guidelines, so let's show them and expose them to the actual users. So these guidelines, like the SIAMS Working Group 5, for example, just describes a little bit what Alem has already said. In order to have a complete narrative, you want all the relevant details. You don't want to just repeat, but you want to make sure that everything you need to assess that case is in the narrative. So, and especially the most important thing is to have an idea, because you have this piece of paper or this digital form where it's a moment in time. It's not longitudinal. So the idea is that the narrative can provide you more this sequence of time, this logical progression and clinical progression of the adverse event. You can add information there that you can add in other fields, obviously, but they should be connected to the story. So if you have laboratory work, if you have risk factors, if you have other causes, they should be written as the story of the patient and the adverse event. And in that way, when you read it, it's seamless and everything that is relevant is integrated with the chronology. And that's basically it. It's the point is that sometimes in order for you to write a clinical narrative, you have to understand what is important at each step. And when you have a form, everything is important. Everything has the same fields besides the mandatory information. It's hard to place each field on a specific timeline. So that is the key, I think, is making sure that, especially that you don't provide contradictory information, that you just provide in the structured field, and that the information that you have in the narrative follows this logic, this sequence. Yeah.
So is that this information or these tips, if you like, are they present in the reporting form in some way? Do they get a pop-up with tips or? Currently,
I believe no. At least in our forms, no. Yeah. I think what has been written obviously in terms of medical narratives, a lot has been written before. There's a lot of guidelines and it's teaching material for medical doctors. But I think in terms of pharmacovigilance, it's very sparse, and sometimes it's integrated in regulatory documents. So you have to really dig. That's literally what I did. You have to read regulatory guidance that will lead you to some guideline that has been written, and there you can find it. But I guess as a reporter, you might find it difficult, especially because this regulatory material, it's not as global as PV is. Yeah.
Do we know anything about how reporters interact with the narratives?
I think all reporters would provide this information if they knew and understood the importance of providing this, as I said before. It's about understanding why it is important to report if you experience an adverse drug reaction. So understanding the importance will hopefully motivate the reporter to report this information as well, even though a report is considered valid without it. But also, as Joana said, there are guidelines how to write a report. Reporters may also think that the information they have may not be relevant for that specific report. And I think try to report everything you have, and because that information may be an important piece in the assessment as a whole, together with other types of reports. Maybe we see that specific drug is taken together in 5 other reports from other parts of the world. So I think it is important to try to stick to the truth, of course, but write down all information you have, since it can be important in the end.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think the fact that even if there are guidelines on how to write a report, there aren't really guidelines how to write a report for pregnancy, for drug-induced liver injury. Each case can be different. So I think the idea of right now providing everything that you have, it could be a good starting point, because there's a lot of nuances to this.
And I think that's a crucial aspect that you mention here, that actually the report in itself is not the full story, but the report will be a piece to a much bigger puzzle. And it's for the reporter, you don't know which part of this piece of the puzzle that you are providing that will be interesting. Like you said, it may be aspects there that will tie together with other aspects in other reports. So, and I would guess as a reporter, it's hard to have that kind of knowledge, bird's eye view.
Exactly. Yeah. So to your point, it's like when you're reporting, it's really hard to know the global impact that this may have or not, and how will assessors pick this. So I think that's sometimes, although again we haven't done a study on this, but I can assume that a reporter might already write something with an idea, with a lens what this could be like, or what this or why did this happen. But I agree that most of the times you just don't know. You're hoping to provide some insights, but you're not really sure which ones are more important. Yeah, that's a great point.
And then if you don't really hear anything back, then you start to wonder, what did my report or reports, do they have any impact or value, or what's the point for me to report in the end? So that's also very important for the National Center to, provide the reports of feedback, but also depending on what happens to those reports, to give the providers a feedback which can motivate them to share even more reports in the future.
Talking about that feedback, how often do you get feedback on your individual reports? Because it would be impossible for a center to provide feedback to everyone.
So I only know of one case, at least, that has reached my knowledge, that, for example, the Netherlands Center, for a while, I don't know if they still do it. I think it stopped, or at least was a little bit challenging during the pandemic. They would write feedback for each reporter. So in a sense, exactly meeting what you just said. I don't know if they still do it. I don't know if other national centers do it, but definitely I think it's something that has been thought about.
There are actually some national centers that have this automation, thank you for your acknowledging the report. And then in some cases giving them feedback, what happened to the report itself. And that's also something that we try to educate, when we have contact with the National Center, to try to keep the reporters engaged, involved, and at least acknowledge them for taking the time to share the reports. So there are, but I know some countries that reward reporters, but they have shared reports, and they have this yearly event that they reward medical doctors or pharmacists, reporters, depending on how many reports they have shared over the years. And I think that's a very good way to really motivate the reporters, but also to acknowledge that they are doing a very important role.
Yeah, and that it's seen.
It's seen, exactly, because these reports are crucial for us to be able to drive pharmacovigilance forward.
So if we then move on to the final theme here, the needs of the assessors as they interact with the narratives. In this theme, you have gathered the assessor's own suggestions and ideas for how their interaction with narratives could be made, so to say, easier and also more fruitful. And we've talked a little about this already as well, but it is a lot to do with different kinds of machine assistance. Was this expected?
Yes, I think the suggestions align pretty well with what we might expect, given the challenges that these assessors face. They're looking mainly for tools that can streamline their work and improve efficiency. As you said, they're very manual tasks, and they do this case by case normally. So they're very repetitive, and sometimes areas they lack expertise because it's a very diverse field and a lot of clinical details. So, for example, there was one mention, I think, of this that goes also aligned with what we just said, this automated guidance. So it was a lot about automation, but like automated guidance for when writing narratives or for when you are reporting a little bit what should be in it and what is relevant or not.
So just looking at how fast things are moving in these areas with automated assistants of different kinds, machine learning, AI assistants, and so on, is it possible to say anything? Where do you think we will be in, say, 2 years' time, 5 years' time?
No, I would say that I think if you would ask this question 2 years ago, the answer might be different. I think there's this Gen I wave and the fact that it's available for everyone to use and it's free. So as you see here, like some assessors already use it, and it's not even something they have developed in-house. So definitely I think it's moving faster now. I think it might reach a plateau. I don't know if we'll get better and better models every year, but I think with a lot that it's out there already, and some of them are open source, a lot of this maybe impossible tasks from the past or that required a lot of efforts, especially technical efforts, might be facilitated. So I think there's a lot of doors being opened. I don't know if we will revamp the PV system. I don't believe so in 2 years, but I think it's part of the picture now. So we have to be aligned with it. And I think it's moving. I think it's moving that way, whether we like it or oppose or so. So yes, I think as opened a lot of things, this large language models especially, and this idea that we can start trusting them should be reflected. I think this is, the biggest reflection that we should have, that we believe that maybe they can accomplish the tasks, but should they? So those are the interesting questions. And I think if we're moving forward in that area, those are the questions that we need from our regulators, and our experts, really. Like if we are going there, and I believe we currently are, we need to know some things before.
I just can agree with that, because there is a need, at least a big need, to automate things in the work we're doing at the moment, and to automate the things that you can do in respect of the risk with data protection, of course, but other things you have to consider, have in mind. We need to find ways how to have the human in the loop, always involved, of course, to validate and make sure that everything is in good standard. But I think, as Joana just said, like we are moving there, even if we like it or not. We just need to find ways how to do it, and to be aware about the risk with using them without quality assuring them, but also to do this in collaboration with stakeholders as the regulators, for example.
And include everyone, ideally everyone. This should be an opportunity for everyone. So it should be regulated, but also equal. I think that's, for us, I think our global vision is exactly that. So it's not that some should move faster than others. That's at least what we believe.
Exactly. And some of, a lot of the manual tasks that we do within signal assessment, signal detection could be automated. And that's so the assessor can be focused on the assessment part instead, the causality part. Yeah. Is there a, relationship here between the drug and ADR, or the vaccine and the ADR? And I think that could be a good help to be able to release the assessors for this administrative task, and instead focus on the assessment itself.
So it's kind of two coins. So it's this very procedural, repetitive, that it's just like, it's a pain sometimes. And then you have the very complex, which is normally at the end of this. So you have two dimensions, really, where I guess, if in regards to your question, maybe the first one, like this procedural part, this process, this very bureaucratic and repetitive, is something that having a human in the loop and having these tools is something that maybe we are more comfortable having something like this. And then just train, educate, give time for the other very complex, which is at the end of that process.
So more fun work for the assessors.
Exactly. Please.
Yes. Absolutely.
Now, if we're looking at the study as a whole, what do you think is the most important takeaway?
So we identified several key insights from the study that present, actionable opportunities with the potential to drive meaningful impact. So the primary objective of the study was to deepen our understanding of an area that has not been explored. So by conducting research in this nature, we gained the ability to gather real-world data that highlights genuine challenges, but also opportunities for improvement. So we knew from before, which was also well confirmed in the study, that case narratives are important when trying to assess a possible connection between a medicine and an adverse drug event. So to be able to continue doing pharmacovigilance and ultimately save patients and consumers, we must together acknowledge that the narratives are important, but there is a huge need, which is like opportunities in the interactions with it, but also, of course, how to write a narrative is also very important. And there is a big need for, education, training, but also other, tools, systems that can support this.
Yeah. I think the key thing here is that as researchers working at a global lens through the Uppsala Monitoring Center, engaging in initiatives like this and talking to where the cycle begins, I guess, where the report begins. So, and I think if we don't do it, normally there's a lot of degrees of separation. And in our work, a lot of it is based on assumptions. And I think validating assumptions and doing research about the knowledge that they have and the challenges that they have, I think is key, because we can be very separated from the main thing.
So you're both very experienced in the PD field, so to say, experienced here at UMC. Were there any results in this study that surprised you?
Not really, to be honest. It was, more or less that what we expected. I think there is a significant need, as I said, around automation to support humans in managing and interacting with increasing volume of pharmacovigilance data, but also the handling of this type of data. But what I take away with me is what Joana also said, like this is true data. This is true needs, challenges that are out there. It's hard to see that maybe from sitting here in Uppsala, working with the global, and to know that these are actually the struggles, the PIVA assessors, our colleagues out there that do have, and that know that some uses ChatGPT, but also other use this and this. Was very, of course, informative, but in general, it was also, as you said, we have been working with this for a while. It is also feels confirming that we are doing this in a more or less the same way.
Yeah, and I think a key, I don't know if it was surprising again, because I think we feel a lot of these tensions as well when we look at a report. But this tension of the narrative being the fundamental and also being the biggest challenge, because just how it can be incomplete or redundant. So this tension, I think, is interesting to explore and to think more in the future, because we are saying that the most important thing, it's the one that provides you a lot of challenges and a lot of back and forth and a lot of just questioning. Yeah.
Speaking about the future, this, as you've said, it's an exploratory study, but you have been able to extract quite a lot of, if not new knowledge, you've been able to confirm sort of knowledge that you already had, but perhaps it also gave you some inspiration as to what to look at next when it comes to narratives?
I think there's we sometimes call them low-hanging fruits, but in this sense I think is more the spread of some concerns. So how spread these concerns are, even in the literature. You can find, for example, there was a mention of a challenge that the assessors use the narratives to code, for example, and that is verified in multiple literature articles that have attempted to build automated models to extract from the narratives and fill in the structured reports. So in a way, I think if you align what is in the literature and what the assessors experience, I think this is, and with new large language models, it could be something for the future. Yeah.
And I also think like this study, of course, as you said, this is an exploratory study, but also this inspires us to do more of this kind of study, for the future, before we start working with a research project. Try to understand the problem itself first, talking to, as I said, stakeholders, colleagues out there, and try to really understand their problem in their settings, and based on that, see what we at the Uppsala Monitoring Center can do to help them.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to the show, Alem.
Thank you.
Joana.
Thank you so much.
I learned a lot today.
Yeah, good.
Hope to have you here soon again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
And if you'd like to learn more about Alem's and Joana's study or how to write useful narratives, check out the links in the episode show notes. Apart from these conversations with experts, we offer a series of audio stories from Uppsala Monitoring Center's pharmacovigilance news site called Uppsala Reports Long Reads, so why not check that out too? That's all for now, but we'll be back soon with more on medicine safety. In the meantime, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. Send comments or suggestions for the show or questions for our guests next time we open up for that. And visit our website to learn more about what we do to promote safer use of medicines and vaccines for everyone, everywhere. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to make sure you won't miss an episode, and spread the word so other listeners can find us too. For Drug Safety Matters, I'm Félix. Thanks for listening.